Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 National Art Education Association Women's Business Meeting, Latina X and Chicana X Art and Pedagogy. My name is Dr. Kevin Jenkins. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm moderating this session. This business meeting is open to all, provides a platform for existing and potential members to consider and support intersectional and inclusive feminist futures. The focus this year is diverse voices in Latina X and Chicana X art, feminisms, and decolonial pedagogies. The panelists aim to provide a platform that allows for awareness and appreciation of the convergent and divergent voices and needs of varied feminisms as experienced in the art education profession and the lives of art educators, artists, and researchers. Please feel free to use the Zoom emoticon reactions or post comments or questions in the chat. We ask that visitors keep their microphones on mute until the end of the presentations. You may find also it'd be helpful to turn off your own video if you experience technical difficulties such as lag or freezing. And after our introduction to the panelists, they will share their screens for their presentation. And just one last note before we proceed is that we are recording this session and we'll make it available for later viewing on the NAEA Convention Pathwell platform. So if you do not wish to have your likeness in the video recording, you may want to leave your video off. Dr. Adetty Pérez de Miles earned a PhD in art education and women's studies from Penn State University. She's also an associate professor of art theory and practice and art education program coordinator at Texas State University and co-president of the Women's Caucus. Dr. Christen Garcia received her PhD in art education at Penn State. She earned an MFA in sculpture in 4D from California State University, Long Beach, and she is an assistant professor and MFA program coordinator at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And Dr. Leslie Sotomayor earned a dual PhD in art education and women's gender and sexuality studies from the Pennsylvania State University. She is a visiting assistant professor of women's and gender studies at Texas Tech University. And I will now stop share and turn it over to our presenters, which I'm starting to see this pattern today. A lot of Penn State people kind of around here. I know, right? It's like they have something going on here.
That's right. We do. I am going to share my screen with you. First of all, thank you everyone for coming to this session. My talk will take about 30 minutes, and then I think we have a question, and then we're going to move on to Christen and Leslie's presentation. So I would like to enter the conversation today from a pedagogical perspective. So a bit of my own education as a student will be my beginning point, and now as a professor. And following, I want to discuss an article that I wrote called The Social Expulsion of the Migrant. And then from there, I'm going to expand this research, specifically looking at the work of some Chicana artists whose work is informed by immigration, by movement, and by border-related issues. And then I will hopefully try to circle back around to think about pedagogy and activism. So let me begin by stating that ethnic minorities, specifically the contributions of Chicana and Latinx artists, are often not often discussed when it comes to American art. And part of this has to do with the historical lack of ethnic and racial diversity in the field of art education, as well as US-centric and Eurocentric canons in art education. In the late 1980s, when I started the Master's of Art Education program at Texas Tech, there was not another Latin American student in the art education program. So this was also the case when I began the doctoral program at Penn State University. So after completing my PhD, and for most of my career, I have worked in predominantly white institutions. So the lack of ethnic diversity has improved slightly now that I'm a faculty at a Hispanic serving institution for the last 3 years. But there are more Latinx students in my classes than before, but at the same time, there are no Latin American art educators in my department and only a handful of Latin scholars in the field of art education. So minoritized faculty experience a problem common to Latinx students as well. So namely, they often feel isolated. Some feel that they are not welcome or supported in their profession. And this can take many forms. For example, not having the opportunity to offer courses in one's area of specialization. In my case, because administrators argued that there was no interest in Latin American art, and therefore that if I offer these courses that they would not make. Lack of exposure to art and art history beyond the prevailing aesthetic traditions also put Latinx students, and in fact, majority students as well, as a disadvantage. This situation leads many Mexican American and Latinx art students to compulsively assimilate mainstream aesthetic traditions in order to feel accepted and to feel that they can be successful. This can create a situation in which most often than not, Latinx students are trapped in this sort of a strategy of imitation, in a way upholding and even reifying Eurocentric canons rather than innovation. And by that, I mean having the ability to look, for example, at the history and contributions of Chicana art and Latinx art in order to look forward. So how does one remember if one does not know? Is something that I've often asked myself. So looking backward to remember our future brings forth what has been forgotten, erased, or silenced. Not knowing or not being able to recover and expand on one's own genealogy results in not acknowledging ourselves, which is such an important starting point. And this is a point for self-understanding, for self-appreciation, for others in the community, as well as advocacy. So in the case of Latinx artists, educators, and students, there's already a working from a place of disadvantage when you do not feel a kinship with existing art history traditions, and also no evidence of alternative Latinx or Chicanx traditions upon which to base the histories of your own pedagogy and artistic practice. So in fact, I did not experience or didn't know that there was something called Chicanx art until I was a graduate student. And so I do, however, want to be clear that by Chicana tradition, I'm not strictly speaking of issues of race or ethnicity, subject matter, or imagery, but perhaps the styling that is common among people of Latin American descent, which I do think it exists. For instance, the vernacular that we see from some Chicano artists, like things like the Virgin of Guadalupe or Aztec symbolism, things like Cholo and Pachuca culture, which would be a homeboy, homegirl culture, and so on. We know that Latinos and especially Chicanx contributions to American art is prominent, but it's also, again, overlooked by historians, by educators, and by programs who are focused on a European, Eurocentric influences. The work of Chicanx artists and scholars are buried in libraries. Luckily, there's beginning to be more archives that are accessible to us to better understand things like the Chicano civil rights movements and the future of aesthetics in regard to present generations of artists. So in this spirit, the artists that I would like to discuss shortly are part of my ongoing research and search for Latinx, Latin America, and Chicano influences in American art. My research is centered in contemporary art practice, especially socially engaged art, and often through the lens of migration and immigration and decolonizing perspectives in pedagogy and art. So doing this type of work, I believe, is necessary to make significant inroads forward in contesting and combating the hubris of the West in its aesthetic and intellectual colonialism. So I'm going to, I want to start talking about some of the artists that I have written about. So this particular work is Transborder Immigrant Tool, or TBT. It is a work that was created by Ricardo Dominguez in collaboration with a group of other artists. But first, a little bit of context. The fear of Mexican immigrants as the other, or people that pose a threat to the apparent integrity of the nation state, has been in the making for a long time, and it has fueled subsequent legal acts, policies, and procedures, including things like the so-called Operation Wetback, Gatekeeper Operation, and Hold the Line. These are aimed at stopping immigration from across the US-Mexico border. Those operations push those who want to cross the border to very dangerous regions of the deserts and mountains, turning the border crossings into a lethal undertaking. This is the reality that Ricardo Dominguez undertakes in Transborder Immigrant Tool. So TBT was created by Dominguez again in collaboration with a group of artists. It is a mobile phone app that uses global positioning systems, or GPS, to help migrants find water stations in the California desert and other locations in Mexico-US borders. The project actually created a great deal of controversy. The political pressure surrounding TBT permanently stalled the completion of the project. The artists were accused of violating immigration laws. These charges were followed by federal and institutional investigations. Dominguez's lifelong engagement with electronic civil disobedience suddenly came to the forefront as something that was undesirable and dangerous. In fact, Dominguez, who is an artist and activist and a professor at UCLA, almost lost his tenure. The artist's goals for this work was to foster collaboration and community engagement in ways that could, if not resolve the migration crisis, help build safety nets that could potentially save people's lives. Dominguez formed alliances with humanitarian organizations such as Border Angels and Water Stations, Inc., volunteering to help place and refill water tanks, as well as map out the different locations where the water was available, and migrants and people that were interested were, given these phones that had been repurposed that had this GPS information. Through the lens of spatial and decolonial theories, I have also explored the work of the artist collective Post-Commodity and their cross-border land art installation called Repellent Fence. This was installed in 2015. The installation created using large-scale balloons prompted reflection on why so many people attempt to create artificial barriers between cultures and landscapes. For Post-Commodity, immigration-related issues should be read through both indigenous and immigrant paradigms. However, in their view, these conversations are most often reinterpreted solely through an immigrant paradigm. And the reason that this matters today is because 50% of border crossers in this area where they work are indigenous people. And we're talking about the Twin Cities in Sonora in the Mexican side, and then Douglas, Arizona on the US side. So yet the voices of Native people are almost non-existent when it comes to politically charged debates about immigration, or how the realities of the border crossing in the Mexico-US border spills into Native lands and impacts Indigenous communities. Their art raises awareness about the invisibility of Indigenous histories and voices in matters of immigration and border crossings, expanding the conversation beyond a dichotomous understanding of the Mexico-US border. In actuality, affords opportunities to reunite Indigenous communities on both sides of the border and redefine conventional notions of what or who constitutes the border. Expanding on this research, I want to now focus on immigration and border issues through the lens of Chicanx culture. Chicano art emerged as an extension of the Chicano movement of the late 1960s and 70s, and encompasses a wide and ever-changing range of mediums, themes, and concerns. The Chicano movement incited many Mexican Americans and those who identified as Chicanos to fight for their place in institutions such as the art world. In spray paint LACMA on the screen, the artist collective ASCO spray painted their names the night in defiance of a LACMA director who had rejected their idea for an art exhibition and had told them that Chicanos created graffiti, not art. Their action exposes the museum apparatus, but also reveals the political stakes involved in their conceptual gestures as members of a marginalized community operating in a hostile arts environment. So the Chicano movement and art was defined by protest, by cultural markers, class struggle, and the political, economic, and cultural fight against racism. Contemporary Chicano art is still influenced by those original tenets, but stretches beyond any one identity constraint. Today, Chicano identity is not easily classified, and there are always questions about being identified or self-identifying as a Chicano artist. And so Margarita Cabrera speaks on this subject. During her 2015 residency at Arizona State University, Cabrera worked with community members to create soft sculptures related to immigration. So about 30 people, including many immigrants, worked with Cabrera to create this saguaro cactus sculptures made of Border Patrol uniforms. And every cactus was also decorated with words or images taken from stories of actual immigrant experiences. Reflecting on her own immigrant story, when asked in an interview, how do you feel about the term Latino and Chicano, Chicana in relationship to your work? This is what Cabrera had to say, end quote. She says, I'm very proud to be working with symbols of the Chicano community and Chicano art movement. I'm very proud to be embraced by this community. I was born in Monterrey, Nuevo León in Mexico, and then I moved to the US. I don't know that if by definition I fit the label of Chicana artist, but I am happy to be that. I do consider myself a border artist, somebody who is addressing issues that are happening along the border and everyday popular culture that is happening now, which is impacted by the immigrant communities that are coming in from Mexico. I think the Latino or Chicano term is defined by language, and it is defined by culture and by genealogy. So I'm happy to be plugging in to the Chicano community as much as I can, because I do feel like I'm a part of it, end of quote. So despite the issues of classification, and regardless of where you stand in the debate of classification, whether it's American, Latinx, Latinoamericano, Latino, Chicanx, or even we might consider post-Chicanx. There are broad inquiries that unite Chicana artists, but the way in which they express these ideas are varied. And this is understandable as Chicana artists navigate a more than a single reality. So it is worth stressing that although not always given credit, the Chicano culture has come to influence many facets of art and design, street art, music, photography, and film. As I was preparing for this presentation, it was really difficult to just, choose a handful of people to talk about. And so I'm especially really excited about the artist names that are on the screen. So if you haven't encountered their work, I completely encourage you to look them up. In what follows, I want to focus on the work of one Chicana artist on the list. So it's M. Janea Sanchez, in particular, her work titled Skinning to Whiten Survival Mechanisms. So this is a 2-channel video projection installation. So in this work, the artist sits between 2 piles of rice placed on the gallery floor, skinning the brown layer off a grain of rice with an X-Acto knife. As the artist skins the brown off of a grain of rice, you can hear the scratching sound and the force of the knife on the surface of the grain of the rice. As the artist undertakes this action, the voices coming in through the wires, through the 2-channel video, reverberate with hostility, with racism, with dehumanization, and lack of compassion for immigrants. Let's listen.
Mr. King, how are you going to secure the border? Well, we got a combination of 3 things. It's common sense. Part of it will have a real fence. 20 feet high, the barbed wire. Electrified. So the sign on the other side that says, it can kill you. In English and Spanish.
The voices that you heard have great power and cause as much suffering as the cutting of a skinning knife. The voices that you heard have great power and cause as much suffering as the cutting of a skinning knife. The presence of these mediated voices, like the presence of the border fences, create barriers, separation, and despair. As Maria Janea Sanchez skins the brown off of a grain of rice and tosses it into the white pile of rice, she reflects on her art and her actions. The artist states the following, end quote. As I skin the brown off of a grain of rice, I remember that historical events that got me to this place. 175 miles from this gallery sits a metal fence fabricated to divide us from them, to divide here from there, a fence meant to keep grasshoppers out, prevent drug mules from crossing, and provide assertion of power for a nationalistic mind frame, end of quote. As the artist skins the brown off of a grain of rice, she thinks about rice farmers whose labor and efforts carefully groom the land that gives existence to the very rice. She states as she does this work, and again, end quote, I remember that I'm a female body of color on display performing these obscene acts. Women just like me from so-called brown-skinned cultures are hired to do the dirty work of the everyday, maintaining the cleanliness of the institution of whiteness, end of quote. So in this artwork, Sanchez renders visible the violent and obscene effects of physical fences, the increased militarization of the border, as well as the xenophobic immigration rhetoric amplified by the news and social media, which were reflected in the audio that we just heard. These voices and resulting actions are the mechanisms of division and domination that are grafted onto the body of immigrants and people of color. Sanchez's artwork thrives to force larger conversations about the effects of the institution of whiteness and everyone's own historical involvement in these histories, whether it's by remaining silent participants, assimilating, and conforming, we maintain the whiteness, right? And so a question for me is always about, our pedagogical endeavors in the classroom. How does our historical involvement in, Eurocentric notions or colonialist, practices and pedagogies maintain these histories, whether it's through self-participation, through assimilation, or through conforming? Sanchez has been involved with migration and border-related issues for many years. In 2016, she contributed to Borrando la Frontera, which is Erasing the Border. It's a community project. It was coordinated, it's a painting coordinating activity in the US-Mexico border, again in the Agua Prieta, Douglas, Arizona region, but also Ana Teresa Fernandez, who worked with her, conducted the same events and actions in the Ciudad Juarez, El Paso border. Ana Teresa Fernandez and M. Janae Sanchez challenged the materiality of the US-Mexico border through its erasure of the structure, making the fence visibly disappear, to turn a wall that divides into the ocean and the sky that expands into a symbol for potential mobility. And so what is important in my research and the artists that I highlighted today are those who suffer in the shadows of the border and border economies through human stories and images. We discuss these multifaceted questions about the sustainability of life in the borderlands. And it's not surprising then that places of migration are also cartographies that create opportunities for positive change and exchange. So my teaching and my research is motivated by these types of complexities and exchanges. And the question that remains for me is, how do we energize positive and decolonial systemic change in our research and with our peers, our colleagues, and our students? And I have some ideas on the subject, for example, through our course content and pedagogy, through social activism, and through creating and participating in alternative cultural spaces that cultivate social justice and identity through art. So what I would like to do, coming to the conclusion of my section, is to show you a video. It's a few minutes long, and it is an art activist action that I facilitated with students of all ages, and the youngest one being 12 years old, which I want to share with you next. And of course, after Christen and Leslie's presentation, I'm happy to, come back and have conversations about that as well. But I do want to share this video with you that is very close and near to my heart. And it is an action to protest the spread of COVID in detention centers. And so this is our young student right here.
Okay. 5, 1, 2, 9, 1, 6, 5, 8, 3, 4. Hello, my name is. I'm 12 years old. I'm calling and my mother is here with me. I would like to leave a message for Senator Cruz. Okay. I'm calling regarding the detention of immigrant families at the Carnes, Dilley, and Burks Family Detention Centers, located in Texas and Pennsylvania. I am distraught about the reports of the spread of COVID-19 in these immigration prisons. It is impossible for ICE to keep families safe from COVID-19 in detention, and no parent should be forced to choose between separation or keeping their child detained. I urge you to take action and demand that ICE release all families to their sponsor together immediately. Deporting families will only contribute to this public health crisis. Demand that ICE commit to a permanent family unit policy.
Okay, okay, that's true.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Good job. Your first activist call to the government. Right? Good job, baby.
Thank you.
Do you want to call Mitch McConnell?
I can't believe I have Senator Cruz, Mitch McConnell's, and Nancy Pelosi's number.
I know, right?
Funny.
Thank you, everyone. With that, I'm going to stop the presentation. Thank you so much.
Love that video. Every time I see it there. So I think it would probably be best to go ahead into the next presentations, and then we have a series of questions that kind of bring them all together.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. So our presentation is called Visualizing Testimonios, Acts of Resistance and Healing. Before we begin, Leslie and I are going to read something. Leslie, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. I'm ready. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all. So visual testimonials are a visual and performative practice of Napantla, creating knowledge by theorizing Napantla spaces. As artists, we write performatively to form our visual testimonials. A residue of the act of Napantla, visual testimonials are a visual sharing of our stories. Gloria Anzaldúa emphasizes that our stories, testimonios, autohistorias, are performances, a collaborative effort between the reader, the writer, and the artist. Writing performatively is a feminist act of creativity, an embodiment of the self through visual text. We define the act of visual testimonials as a feminist methodology of decolonizing the self and bodies of knowledge by activating our autohistoria teoria.
Engaging in a collage of image and text, the maker-performer navigates tense, ambiguous, and shifting borderland spaces. The act of writing visual testimonials is decolonizing. It does not follow traditional academic paper formatting. For example, we do not italicize words in other language so as not to exotify Spanish or our translanguaging, using two or more languages together. In writing our visual testimonios, we create transcultural spaces that expand beyond traditional modes of how text is traditionally implemented within academia. As curadoras, we occupy multiple spaces critically, while acknowledging fluid intersections towards new knowledge, creation, and transformation.
Visual testimonials are a process of simultaneous fragmentation and wholeness. Anzaldúa and Keating refer to Coyolaki, an Aztec warrior goddess who represents, quote, the psychic and creative process of tearing apart and pulling together. She represents fragmentation, imperfection, incompleteness, and unfulfilled promises, as well as integration, completeness, and wholeness, end quote. To live and work with Coyolaki, the visual testimonios become actors comfortable with the uncomfortable, disruption, fragmentation, and the process of the in-betweenness. Okay, so this first title slide is an example of how Christen and I are theorizing and embodying the act of visual testimonials with the image that's on the right side of the screen, the text. Go ahead to the next one, sorry. Christen, you're muted.
Thanks. So what is a visual testimonio? And I know we just explained it in all these words, but just simply put, it's using text and image to share our stories. So we think of it as and for us, it's a space of transformation.
Yes, and we're defining testimonio as thinking about a moment, right, or moments where something changed, caused a transformation in your lived experiences, right? And so visual testimonials then is a visual embodiment of this interpretation of transformation. Next.
A visual testimonio activates an in-between space where the gap, la rajadura, is no longer a place of teetering precariously on the edge or straddling the in-between, but rather a bridge is created and vision summoned, embodied by nepaneras as new possibilities through intentional acts that lead to transformation. This is something that Leslie and I wrote a few months ago together as we were trying to figure out this process and how to articulate it. Because for us, we're visual artists. We're artists before anything else. And we're aware that the expectation for us as people, you know, as faculty in art education is more so to write. And so we're constantly straddling this pressure between our visual work and our text. So in a way, it's this, the tension that exists between the art and the writing within itself, aside from our experiences of in-betweenness, you know, living within a borderlands, whether physically, metaphorically, conceptually. The piece on the side here is a graduate student at UTRGV. Her name is Adetty. And this is something that she recently wrote, and I just wanted to highlight it. A couple of things. Like you see here, la graduada, you know, for her is like as a high school graduate, you know, as being the first with an associate degree. And so she highlights these things. And if you see where she scratches it out on the lower right here, so she uses a mixture of text, color, image, and then drawing within the page. So these are ways in which she, you know, is theorizing based on her lived experience.
So the components that we are highlighting with visual testimonio theorizing and practice are four overarching areas. And the first one is autohistoria teoría. So Gloria Anzaldúa coined this theory and term that translated into English means the theorizing of self-history, right, of our own history. And so how testimonio, right, our testimonios, an experience that has changed us in some way, how we can look at these experiences in our life and theorize through and with them, right? And through this theorizing of our own lived experiences, right, and our own funds of knowledge, we are resisting oftentimes stereotypes, assumptions, and mainstream knowledge, or in academia, right, the canons that have been historically reproduced that are often white supremacist, patriarchal, etc. The third overarching theme is transcultural recovery. So because of these lived experiences, right, and very weaving in even Adetty's presentation for hours, right? What has been lost? What are the gaps? What are those rajaduras that Anzaldúa speaks of, right? And that have not been part of our cultural capital. And we intentionally then are going back and researching and remembering, right, in this recovery process. And the fourth being translanguaging. So how does language, dialect, vernacular, right, that is often excluded in academic writing and spaces and art process, how can that be included in a variety of ways through visual testimonial work? On the right-hand side, you will see an image that's actually Christen's. And so Christen, you might wanna say a little bit about that and your visual testimonial that is accompanied with it.
Sure. I was just thinking about the C word and just something I quickly embroidered about, just something that was embedded within me growing up was Garcia women work in casa. And so I was thinking casa, and then C is for Chicana and casa. Garcia women work in casa. Familia es primera. Mija, you need a husband who works so you can cuidar for your niños. And HSI, so Hispanic Serving Institution, cosa sad. Siempre va la raza. Too much Chicana art, non-threatening light-skinned Chicana, pinche colorism. So I was just thinking about the different C's within my life and how they relate to one another. And I think it was the Chicana and casa that brought the C's there.
So, in thinking about the theory of autohistoria, right? Autohistoria teoria, it's a decolonizing, theorizing of one's own experiences, historical context, knowledge, and performances through creative acts. And so we're using a very expansive definition and word for creative acts as being an umbrella that can, many things can be captured under it, right? So it can be the visual arts, it can be curating, it can be writing and poetry, music, dance, right? Any of these things. The image on the right-hand side is an example of one student's work from the fall semester, where Christen and I led a creative visual testimonial workshop, and we will be doing that too towards the end of our presentation segment. And this is one of the examples from their workshop. And so you will see how they incorporated imagery through text combined on a Word doc space.
So continuing with transcultural recovery that Leslie brought up, thinking about it as a recovery of something that's been lost or repressed. And I think for us, it's maybe more so, or for me, it's something more so that's been repressed, or even recovering something that has been omitted, like Adetty was saying, is that, you know, we didn't learn about Latinx, Chicanx artists in our classes. I mean, we had, I know for Leslie and I, we had to seek them out even when we were working on our PhDs, like let alone masters, because there really weren't many books on them, and we had to find things that in a way that didn't exist, or that representation that wasn't there. So that's one example of that. And here is a collage of words. It's more like a wave, or I was less interested in the color, but more interested in the shape of this one.
So with as an act of resistance, we're challenging, exposing, disrupting, rejecting, and creating counter narratives to white hegemonic beliefs and teachings, right? And that can include, for example, the stereotype and assumption that we often hear in mainstream society and culture and canons where Spanglish is not real, right? To be from the border means to be less than. Academic writing is worth more than creative work. Non-academic knowledge, right? Non-traditional, non-existing, non-essential, non-human, nonsense, right? So this idea that if it's not grounded in academic canons, then it is not valid. It is not knowledge, right? And so these are the things that Christen and I have been struggling and navigating and crossing back and forth through, right, within our lived experiences, not only as scholars and researchers, but also as artists and writers. And this image on the right is another sample from Christen's work with visual text and imagery. Did you?
Leslie, do you want to?
Translanguaging, yes. So this is one of my examples. It was published in the fall in the Visual Culture and Gender Online Open Access Journal. And it's entitled In the Name of. And I wanted to share this with you all as an example of translanguaging that extends beyond just text and words, right? And so how as artists and as curators, we can think about translanguaging in these multimodal ways, right? So I have the art work, right, on one side of this page as this effort of creative process and translanguaging through art. And then right next to it is the visual testimonio through words and text, right? And Spanglish, right? And the mixture of Spanish and English words tied into it as this conversation is happening simultaneously.
So this leads us to the second part of our talk. We want to lead you through something. We don't want to just tell you some things. We're hoping that this can be an experience. And we want you to think about a few different things right here on the page.
Yeah.
So the first one is curadora, right? As curator, healer. This is a really good question that Leslie posed, and it's what experience has changed you in some way, some experience in your life. It could be something good, it can be something bad. Nepatla, so again, as in the act of living in between worlds. How do you find yourself living in between two worlds? Teorizar or theorize. How does Nepatla, or this feeling of living in between worlds, and we can experience that in so many different ways, how does that relate to your lived experiences? Autohistoria, so the sharing of our stories. This is where we invite you to open up a doc file. And as an alternative, you can take out a sketchbook or a piece of paper. So create that file and start telling your story. And here are some things to think about as you do this. Don't write in academic paragraph form. Think about the arrangement of text that you saw on the page. Think about using color, image, using characters to write and to create images with. And then visualize. So you can include images alone. You don't have to, it's not about captioning or figuring your image and putting figure 2 and leaving this formal caption. You can just include the image. Koila Shaki, writing in fragmented thoughts. So as you could see some of the examples from before, they were thoughts, just a bunch of thoughts put together in pieces, and then through the pieces created a wholeness out of that. Translanguage. Use 2 or more languages. You could think of it in the way Leslie said, image and text as language. You could use English with another language, English and Spanish, and how do they combine? And also collectivity. We'll ask you at the end to share your visual testimonio. Did you want to add anything to that, Leslie?
No, I think that's great. So we thought we would set aside about 5 to 10 minutes give you a chance. We invite you to pull up a Word doc, pull out a piece of paper, and reflect on these first three questions. And it's very much a stream of consciousness activity, right? And so what comes up for you as you are reflecting on these questions? What experience have changed you in some way? How do you find yourself living between 2 worlds? And how does Napantla relate to your lived experiences? So how does that in-betweenness, between worlds, how is that relevant to your lived experiences?
Any questions on what we're asking you to do?
Great. I put the timer on.
So we'll give you about 9-10 minutes to work. And then at the end, we'll ask a few of you, if you're open to it, to share what you've come up with. And feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat as well, if you don't want to verbally say what you have to say.
In that case, maybe we'll go ahead and do, in the sake of time, is we do have some guiding questions to kind of think through a lot of this that has been discussed today. But maybe what we'll do is kind of center on one question. So I'll show them so that way, if you want to view the video later, you can revisit the questions, let it really percolate. But we can go ahead and at least maybe talk about one of them. And so let's see, share again. All right. So the 3 questions being ruptures do Latinx and Chicanx art and theories generate for educators, artists, and scholars? And by ruptures, mean, for example, opportunities, challenges, and gaps. What methodologies can be used to decolonize class curriculum, pedagogy, and/or artistic practice? But I think for the time that we have remaining, for us might kind of open up is what questions or self-reflections and resonances, connections and disconnections does the work of Christen, Leslie, and Adetty invoke?
So Kevin, Karen has a suggestion on the chat. She thought that perhaps some people would be more comfortable sharing if we recorded the, if we pause the recording. So certainly if you want to share and you want us to record, that would be perfectly fine. Just let us know. And then I think Mary just put in on the chat as well, if life is thorny like a cactus, but its flowers get tickly and finally sticky on you and me, we change.
Yes, certainly. Let me see. I tell you what.
I can also share my screen really quick.
They're here.
Let's see. Can you all see this? Can you see my screen? Or no?
Yes, I see it.
Yeah. I was kind of playing, I was inspired by Christen's, sort of play with the word see. And I was kind of playing a little bit with one of the words that they had. So I took the see and thought about things like hair. And then this word is I. And then these 2 words right here together mean aquí. So like caring for oneself is kind of what I was kind of beginning to think about through the exercise. I didn't get far enough, but I was really enjoying, thinking about it and making meaning in that way. So I'm going to stop share.
Thank you, Adetty, for sharing.
Yes, and I can, let me pause the recording for a moment.
So I would like to thank everyone for, participating in the session with us. It's, been a pleasure to share our work with you. As you can see, we're very passionate about what we're doing, and we're trying to forge collaborations and partnerships and networks, through the Women's Caucus, but also, in our own individual work. So, Kevin, with that, you're welcome to.
All right. Well, we do have some announcements, such as, and I do believe I saw Rebecca here. So we are delighted to announce that, at the close of the convention next weekend, Dr. Rebecca Bajans-Turk will be taking the reins as the new president of the Women's Caucus. So Rebecca has held a number of leadership roles in the Women's Caucus over the years, and we're looking forward to her leadership as president. We'll now give Rebecca the floor if she would like a moment to speak.
Sure. Pardon.
Stop there so we can.
Okay. Pardon the no camera at the moment. I'm very much being mom today on the Saturday, and this is anyway. There's that. Thanks so much. I'm super excited to keep up the wonderful work that Women's Caucus has been doing, but also to find out what can and does Women's Caucus need to be moving forward. How are we serving our members, and how can we expand what we're doing, or make sure that we remain relevant? And I think that a lot of our, the last workshop presentation is a wonderful example of the great work that Adetty and Kevin have been doing the last 2 years. And I hope to build upon that with the entire executive group and all of our members. Thank you all so much. I'm super duper excited to work with everyone.
Rebecca, thank you so much for that quick introduction. So we are really excited about your leadership, and of course, we will be here to support you. And we also want to encourage, the people that are still here with us to join the Women's Caucus and think about leadership positions in our organization.
Yes. And so coming up next, quite shortly, from 1:45 to 3 p.m., New York-based artist Carla Ganis giving this year's Regions Artist Talk. And then afterwards at 4 p.m., we'll hold the Women's Caucus Awards ceremony and also pay tribute to Dr. Elizabeth De La Cruz. And so thank you again for attending. We look forward to seeing you again very shortly. Breakout rooms will be open in just a moment for you to visit with friends, or you can hang out in the main room for more of these short videos about contemporary women artists from the Women's Caucus YouTube channel.